The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus showed himself to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter said to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time Jesus said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Jesus said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because Jesus had said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And so he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and somebody else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, Jesus said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel inspired by God. Have you heard of the notion of a vision board? A vision board? Yeah? A vision board. So a vision board is a kind of a series of affirmations that you put together to try to create an agenda for yourself in the year ahead. So about 10, maybe 12 years ago, I remember creating a vision board for myself. And I wrote it out. It's a 2-page document, and I've memorized it, obviously. And the first thing I do every morning when I get out of bed, I kneel at the side of the bed, and I go through this in my mind, and I create intentions in the day, for the day ahead, in all of these categories. And I have 8 categories, that I have affirmations for myself. And the first category is my spiritual health. The second category is my intellectual health. The third category is my dream health, because I work a lot with my dreams. The fourth one is my emotional health. The fifth one is my physical health. The next one is my social health, my relationships. The next one is my financial health. And the last one is my mission health, my purpose here. So in each of these 8 categories, I have 4 or 5 affirmations that I will say and create for myself in the morning. An example. So for instance, my emotional health, one of the affirmations is, I live in total freedom without fear, without anger, or without anxiety concerning personal, societal, global, or even cosmic affairs. And so in each category, I have a bunch of affirmations. And I kneel at the side of the bed, and I start my day by, creating that kind of an agenda. And then on my birthday every year, I revisit the list and see, are there things I've accomplished that I can take off the list? Are there things I need to add to the list? So that's basic. That's what a vision board looks like. A series of affirmations. So I had a very strong impression this morning when I was reading this gospel that Jesus is inviting Peter to do a vision board, to make a series of affirmations. In just a few weeks before this incident, Peter has denied 3 times that he even knew who Jesus was. And now this will be their last encounter. And Christ is offering an opportunity to create a series of affirmations. And he uses just 3 times, exactly the number of times that Peter had denied him. So you can imagine that every time Peter met Jesus after the resurrection, immediately Peter was thinking, "Oh my God, the last time I met this guy, I denied I even knew him." So he's filled with fear, he's filled with anxiety, he's filled with guilt, he's filled with shame. So every time he sees Jesus, obviously these are the emotions that are coming from him. And Jesus recognizes this. And this is going to be their last encounter. Jesus is gone after this. And so he takes him aside after the breakfast, and he gives him an opportunity to create a series of affirmations 3 different times. Peter, son of John, do you love me? And so he's getting Peter to create an affirmation. Yes, I do. Yes, you know I do. Yes, you know everything. You know I do. So each of the affirmations is actually getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so he's obliterating the guilt, the fear, the shame, the anxiety. And he's going to leave him then in a state of love. He's going to replace all of these negative emotions with a total commitment to Christ consciousness. So it feels like a real affirmation. And it feels like it's a real ceremony. This isn't just a kind of a conversation between two guys at the end of a meal. He takes Peter aside and he addresses him very, very formally. No place else in the gospel will he call him Simon, son of John. 3 times this morning he calls him Simon, son of John. Do you love me? Simon, son of John. Do you love me? Simon, son of John. Do you love me? So every place else he'll be called Peter, which is just a nickname. Peter's like calling a guy Rocky. Peter's just the Latin word for a rock. So Jesus was really good at giving people nicknames. He called the sons of James and John had their nickname. Sons of Thunder, he called them. So typically, in talking to Peter, he addresses him as Rocky. Rocky, let's go fishing. Rocky, what are you doing today? Rocky, what did you have for breakfast? This morning, it's really, really reforming. It is Simon, son of John. So it's a ceremony, it's a ritual that Christ is leading him to. And then he ends with it's a strange phrase. The last thing he says to him was, follow me. Now, you think, okay, what's the big deal about that? The big deal is, this is the last time he's ever going to see them. Peter's never going to see him again. So it's not like the first time he said to him, follow me, was the very first encounter they had. They're coming out of their boats, they've just been fishing all night, and Christ says, follow me. And they leave their nets and they follow him. But now this is the last time they'll ever meet him again, and the last injunction he gives to them again is, follow me. So what is it he's asking of Peter in this stage when he talks about follow me? And obviously it's the radical commitment to alignment with the mission that the Father gives to Peter, just as the radical commission that Jesus had from the Father, or that you have from the Father, or that I have from the Father. The final piece of advice, or the final injunction, or the final request of Jesus to all of us is, follow me, in the sense of not do what I've done, but do what the Father is asking of you to do. So in any situation, the question to ask is not so much, what would Jesus do? Jesus may have been asked to do something totally different in a situation. The question is, what is the Father asking of me to do? And so not what will Jesus do, but what am I expected to do? That's brilliant. So let me just add to that before you continue. The first part of that story, which we didn't read this morning, was the miraculous draught of fishes, where Jesus is on the shore cooking breakfast. The guys recognize him. He comes in, but he hasn't enough fish cooked. And he says to Peter, get me some of the fish you just got. And my idea about that is that Jesus is passing the baton to them. He could have had enough fish. Obviously, he fed 5,000 people in the desert with 2 fish. So he's not going to have a big deal to feed 7. There was only 7 of them there on this occasion with a couple of fish. But he wants to pass the baton. And Peter's the guy who goes onto the ship and gets the extra fish. So you're absolutely right, Jen. Again, in this instance, he's putting Peter into the adult role. Now guys, you guys are taking over from here. It's a terrible translation. The word that's translated as fear really should be translated as awe. It's sense of awe in face of God. And in Swahili, we have the very same notion. If you have a friend who's just had a great accomplishment, what you will say to her is, "Nakuogopa, I am afraid of you." And it's not that I'm trembling in front of your presence right now, it's that I'm filled with awe for what you've just accomplished. So in Swahili, we get the very same notion. When you say, I am afraid of, it has a totally different sense. I am in awe of what you have achieved. And that is the sense. So when it says, for instance, in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is not somebody trembling in front of a distant, demanding deity. It's somebody just filled with awe in the presence of the divine. And that's one of the great attributes of little children. Children are filled with awe at life. It's not that they're afraid of life, they're filled with awe at everything. It's like whether it's a stone or a snail or a star in the sky, they're just, they're drinking it in. So it's a terrible translation to put it as fear. Do you fear? To fear God. It's the sense of awe in God's presence. That's beautiful, beautiful insight. So each time, as you say, the first time you're asked a question like that, there might be just kind of a superficial answer, of course, yeah, absolutely, I know you. But when you're asked a second and a third time, then you really have to begin thinking and examining, your deepest, reactions to a situation or to a person. Absolutely right. So you're going to plumb a deeper and deeper level of the self in order to answer the question. You can't love something that you fear. So I'm totally convinced that we're just born with two emotions. Every little infant comes with two emotions, love and fear. And when love is self-directed, it becomes self-esteem. When love is other-directed, it becomes compassion. When fear is self-directed, it becomes depression. And when fear is other-directed, it becomes anger. And then these four pieces permute and combine in various ways, making all the higher level virtues and vices. So ultimately, every virtue is just love in some disguise. In a different situation, love presents as compassion, resilience, a sense of humor, patience, forgiveness, whatever. And there's only one vice, and it's fear. But it'll come in different guises. It'll come as anxiety, or as anger, or pessimism, or depression, or whatever, depending on the circumstances. And at base, these two, the greatest fear of all is the fear of not being loved, or the fear of being unlovable. And that's what the little infant is wrestling with as it develops an ego for the very first time. The little infant who came in totally convinced it's going to enter a world in which it's going to be loved, embraced, totally accepted without any conditions whatsoever. Obviously he's not doing this consciously as a little baby, but the soul who's coming in is expecting that, and instead of that, it meets a world in which people have lots of other commitments and can't be there 24/7. And so the horrible realization at about 6 or 7 months in a child is, oh my God, I'm unlovable. Why is mother abandoning me? Why am I sitting here screaming my head off and nobody's coming? Because obviously not just that I'm not loved, but I'm unlovable. I can't be loved. That's the deepest, deepest fear in every single human being. The birth process itself, unfortunately, the very birth process itself is very traumatic for a little child. Yeah. Every aspect of it. The fact that you're confined to a tiny little embryo, you who had cosmic consciousness, and now having gotten used to the environment after 9 months, you're learning how to do somersaults in the amniotic fluid, and all your needs are being provided and whatever, and all of a sudden, the cave in which you live, the walls are crushing in, the ceiling's coming down, the floor is coming up, and you're expected to go spelunking through this tiny little kind of channel here and find your way out. It's freaky for the little child. There's a great series of books written by a guy called Seán. He's a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist who has lived in the States in 1956. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And they're called the perinatal matrices. And as a psychiatrist, he has a thesis that there are 4 stages to the birthing process. That depending on a difficulty being experienced by the child at each of these stages, it leads to particular kinds of neurotic behaviors in the adult. And as a psychiatrist, he can determine, when he's dealing with a client, he can determine from their neurotic behavior what stage of the birth process was particularly difficult for the child. It's called the perinatal matrices. He's written a whole book on this topic. And so, of course, it's really difficult for a child. The entry process into life is really horrific, on the little child. Yeah. Lights being slapped in the tush, as you say, stuff being put in your eyes. Yeah. Really difficult. I mentioned this to you before. I have a T-shirt with the photograph of a woman on it standing at the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was a woman who died in a bike accident last year, a friend of Michael Choi's. Remember that story? Yeah. And it says, at the other side of fear lies freedom. And she was at the other side of fear lies freedom. And sure, this was a woman who, like you, Rita, faced all kinds of physical challenges by hiking in very, very difficult terrains to overcome her own fear. So in some senses, given the manner of our birthing and the fact that every single one of us is going to be bathed in fear from very, very, very early on, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because it is the struggle to overcome the fear that actually unleashes the depths of love. If there had been no experience of fear or deprivation, we'd be living ho-hum kinds of lives. It's the fact that the challenge of experiencing the fear that drives us to finally encounter the freedom.
What about cesarean babies? When they have a cesarean,
It's interesting.
they
There's a
don't go
whole
through
bunch
the
of
birth
difficulties.
process, huh?
There's a whole bunch of difficulties associated with a cesarean birth. You know, yeah. Part of it is that literally that the child's immune system is slightly compromised, because literally the vaginal juices encountered by the child on the way out of the womb actually create a protective layer in the child for as a kind of a defense against all kinds of illnesses that it would subsequently encounter. That's one of the difficulties if it's a cesarean section, that the baby doesn't encounter that. There's also some psychological studies that the struggle to be born when the child is airlifted out, you know, through a cesarean section, that there is it has a psychological impact as well. That the kind of the commitment to striving to overcoming difficulties is actually lessened a little bit, and so there's a consequence to cesarean section, both immunologically and psychologically. Now, obviously, you can't say that everybody born by cesarean section is going to have these issues, and everybody born naturally. But when you look at that demographically across large numbers, there are definitely psychological consequences and immunological consequences to being airlifted out via cesarean section versus being born in a vaginal delivery. Yeah, you're absolutely. There's a great passage in John is accredited with the five books of the New Testament: the Gospel of John, the Book of Revelation, and then 3 letters. And in one of his letters, he says precisely this. He says, "How can you claim to love God, whom you have never seen, if you do not love your brother and sister, whom you do see?" So literally, the best evidence that you're loving God is, you know, that you're loving your neighbor, whoever the neighbor is. Yeah. And you literally are loving God, because God, that is God right there, you know, enfleshed.